What's going on, guys? It's Mitch of the Bottom Line View here to give you another top 10 in the NFL. Today, it's going to be the top 10 offenses in NFL history. If you guys have not checked out my top 10 defenses in NFL history, there will be a link in the description. You can go check that out. But today, this is the top 10 offenses in NFL history. The criteria for this list was a lot tougher than the defensive top 10. This list was a lot more stat-driven. An offense cannot solely be held responsible for wins and losses. So keep these 5 things in mind when looking at this list. Dominance in their era or their year. How dominant was that team compared to their competition? Awards and records. Did this team set records that year or over a course of 3 or 4 years? Stats were huge. Like I said, this was a stat-driven list. How many points did the team score? How many yards did the team gain? Etc. Consistency was also a little bit of a factor. If a single team was great over a course of a few years, like we'll see on this list, then it impacted their position. And also their roster. Did they have many Pro Bowlers that year? Did they have Hall of Famers? So keep those 5 things in mind when taking a look at this list. At number 10, I have the 2004 Indianapolis Colts, led by MVP quarterback Peyton Manning, who set a record at the time of 49 touchdown passes in a season. Catching the balls from Peyton Manning were Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne, and Brandon Stokely, who all had 1,000 yards in 2004. In the backfield was Edgerrin James, a complete running back who was also a Pro Bowler that year. The 04 Colts scored 522 points, had 32.6 points per game, 2.98 points per drive, 171 point differential, 6,475 total yards. They ranked first with the pass and 15th with the run, and were second in turnovers. Their records, they set a record for passing touchdowns, Peyton Manning did, with 49 passing touchdowns. They had more 5-touchdown games than anybody else in history, and they had the most consecutive 40-plus point games in NFL history. So the Colts were absolutely stacked offense, and they put up the stats to prove it. They also set records at the time, so they're definitely one of the top 10 offenses in NFL history. What might have held them back from being any higher was that the records were broken a few years later, which definitely doesn't help the offense. But if you look, this was a complete offense with a good offensive line, a great group of receivers, and a great quarterback, and even a good running back. So the Colts of 04 are number 10 in the top 10 offenses in NFL history. The early 80s, the San Diego Chargers revolutionized the way that the passing game was done in the NFL in the early 80s, specifically 1981, where the San Diego Chargers had their best offensive season yet. Air Coryell, that's what the scheme was called. With Dan Fouts at quarterback, the San Diego Chargers offense was among the greatest passing offenses in NFL history. The Chargers led the league in passing yards, an NFL record 5 consecutive years from 1979 to 1983, and again in 1985. They also led the league in total yards and offense from 78 to 83 and also 85. Dan Fouts, Charlie Joyner, and Kellen Winslow are all Pro Football Hall of Famers. The San Diego Chargers are a huge part of NFL history in terms of the way that the game is played today. In the Chargers' best offensive season, 1981, they scored 478 points, had 29.9 points per game, 88-point differential, mostly because their defense was really, really bad, 6,744 yards, ranked first with the pass and 16th with the rush, 13th in turnovers, but their consistency is the reason why they're ranked at number 9. They have more 400-plus yard games in a row than anybody else with 11. Dan Fouts was also the Offensive Player of the Year in 1982, and they sent 10 different players on offense to the Pro Bowl from the years 1980 to 83. So that is very, very impressive. And they were ranked first in points and first in yards for a long time. So the San Diego Chargers are one of the most prolific 80s offenses in NFL history. The 2011 New Orleans Saints are number 8 on my top 10 offenses in NFL history, and I feel like they're one of the most overlooked offenses in NFL history. You got to think back and really look at the record books to really figure out how good this offense was. They set the most passing yards in a season with Drew Brees, most total yards in a season with the Saints offense, all-purpose yards for Darren Sproles. They had the Offensive Player of the Year with Drew Brees, and the most points ever scored at home in a season with 329. If you average that out in a 16-game season, that's over 40 points a game. And if you think that the Saints offense wasn't really loaded in 2011, take a look at their Pro Bowlers. They had 5. Drew Brees, Jimmy Graham, Colston, Bushrod, Evans. They had a loaded offense, a very underrated offensive line, a very underrated receiver core, and of course, one of the greatest at the quarterback position to ever do it, Drew Brees, with a great coach in Sean Payton, who knew how to utilize all his weapons. This was a complete offense, an offense that ranked first in yards, second in points, actually to the 2011 Green Bay Packers, who were very close to making this list, but the Saints were the best of them all in 2011. They scored 547 points, had 34.2 points per game, a 3.13 points per drive, 208 point differential, which was 13 a game, 7,474 yards, which is the NFL record, 19th in turnovers, ranked first in passing yards, 12th in rushing yards, a 13-3 record where they ended up losing to a very good San Francisco 49ers team. And it's just a very good offense, a great passing offense. 2011 New Orleans Saints are one of the greatest offenses in NFL history. Number 7 may be a bit of a shocker to a lot of people, seeing as how I just listed the 2011 Saints as a great team in 2011. There was also the Green Bay Packers in 2011. But what about the most consistent team from that span? From 2010 to 2012, the New England Patriots had one of the greatest offenses in NFL history, noted by the amount of points that this offense scored. It was absolutely insane. Scored 32.4 points per game in 2010, 32.1 in 2011, and 34.8 in 2012. Oh yeah, all those offenses in points rank in the top 11 of all time. They had 3 offenses in the top 11 in terms of points per game. Points per drive, they were almost as ridiculous. 3.12 in 2010, 2.99 in 2012, and 2.85 in 2011. Their roster consisted of Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, Wes Welker, Aaron Hernandez, Logan Mankins, and Matt Light. All those guys made the Pro Bowl over that span. Hernandez and Gronk were another huge revolutionary movement in the offenses of the NFL. No offense had 2 talented tight ends like the Patriots did and played them like they did. They had a point differential of 226, which was 14.1 per game in 2012, 6,846 yards in 2012, a pass run of 4th and 8th in 2012. So it was also a very balanced offense in quite a few of those years, and had turnovers, were ranked first in turnovers in 2010, third in 2011, and second in 2012. They had records of 14-2 in 2010, 13-3 in 2011, where they made the Super Bowl, and 12-4 in 2012. This offense set a whole bunch of consistency records through its years of 2010 to 2012, including the most consecutive games scoring 1 touchdown, most consecutive games scoring 2 touchdowns and 4 touchdowns, the most consecutive games with 350 yards, the most consecutive games with 450 and 500 yards, as well as owning the record for the most first downs in a season in 2012. At number 6, I have the Dan Marino season of a lifetime. 1984 Miami Dolphins, led by MVP Dan Marino, who set a record at the time for passing touchdowns and passing yards with 48 passing touchdowns and the first guy to go over 5,000 yards passing. They also had the most consecutive games scoring 3+ touchdowns and still hold that record to this day. The Dolphins in '84 were an offense that was led by Dan Marino's arm. He also had Clayton and Duper, the Mark brothers, at receiver. They were ranked first in points and first in yards that year and had 513 points and 6,936 total yards. That's 32.06 points per game and a point differential of 215, which is 13.4 points per game. They ranked first in passing and 16th in rushing. They were third in turnovers and had a 14-2 record, but lost the Super Bowl. Poor Dan, never got his ring. This was an absolute amazing feat. In 1984, to throw for over 5,000 yards and throw for 48 touchdowns, that was absolutely unheard of. The record was not broken for passing touchdowns until 2004 by Peyton Manning. That is how good this offense was in 1984, and that's how good Dan Marino was in his time. So, the Miami Dolphins of 1984 ranked 6th as the 6th greatest offense in NFL history. At number 5, I have the offense that everybody seems to forget about. The 1983 Washington Redskins. The Washington Redskins in '83 actually posted the most points ever scored by a team. And they also still hold this record to this day of the best turnover margin of all time. Joe Theismann won the MVP and Offensive Player of the Year that year. And oh yeah, their running back Riggins, he also had 24 rushing touchdowns, which was at that time the most rushing touchdowns of any running back in NFL history. They were third in yards that year, and they had a roster that featured Theismann, John Riggins, Art Monk, and Charlie Brown. They had 3 Pro Bowlers and scored 541 points in 1983 and had 33.8 points per game. They had a 209 point differential, which was 13 points per game, and they were very, very balanced. They ranked 7th in passing and 3rd in rushing. They had 6,139 yards and went all the way to the Super Bowl with a 14-2 record, but lost to the LA Rams. But for a team that posted the most points of all time at that time in 1983, they got to be featured in the top 5 offenses of all time. The team that broke the Washington Redskins' 1983 record of most points in a season was the 1998 Minnesota Vikings, who ranked 4th. The Minnesota Vikings featured Randall Cunningham at quarterback and a rookie of the name of Randy Moss, who set a record for most rookie touchdowns, 17, that is yet to be broken. Rookie of the Year Randy Moss with the most points of all time. Yeah, this offense was pretty good. Oh yeah, and they had another receiver by the name of Chris Carter. He was also not bad himself. The Minnesota Vikings had 556 points in 1998. They scored 34.8 points per game at 3.07 points per drive. 260 point differential, which was 16.2 points per game. First in passing, 11th in rushing, 6,264 total yards, and they were 15-1. This was one of the greatest teams of all time to never win a Super Bowl. They lost in the NFC Championship with a last-second field goal from the Atlanta Falcons. Sad, sad moment for the Minnesota Vikings fans. But they can always look back at this team as being a phenomenal offensive powerhouse with some of the most entertaining, most electrifying players ever to grace an NFL field. And they were just bombs away to Randy Moss. They were a super exciting team to watch. You got to put the Minnesota Vikings of 1998, who had the record of most points of all time until it was broken a few years later. But the Minnesota Vikings of 1998 are 4th on the top 10 offenses in NFL history. At number 3, I have the most modern offense of all these units on the list, the 2013 Denver Broncos. Yeah, that Broncos team that got absolutely destroyed in the Super Bowl, but remember before that? Yeah, they set the record for the most points in a season. They also had Peyton Manning, who set the most passing touchdowns and passing yards ever done by a quarterback in 2013. They had a roster that featured Peyton Manning, Demaryius Thomas, a little white guy named Wes Welker, Julius Thomas. They had 4 Pro Bowlers, 4 All-Pros, and also on the offensive line, they had Luis Vasquez. This was a stacked Denver Broncos team. They ranked first in points, first in yards, scored 606 points in the season, which is the record, 37.9 points per game, which is absolutely insane. They scored exactly 3 points per drive, a point differential of 207, which was 12.9, total yards of 7,317, pretty darn close to the 2011 Saints, first in passing yards, 15th in rushing yards, 17th in turnovers, which wasn't their strong suit, but they had the MVP, the Offensive Player of the Year, all these records for passing touchdowns, passing yards, points in a season. And you also look at when these records were set. These were records in the 2010s, when passing offense is crazy. The penalties are crazy. The style of play is a lot different than it was a few years ago. So, the 2013 Broncos have to be taken a little bit back because of that. But they are still a prolific offense that's third of all time. At number 2, I have the most consistent offense in a 3-year span, the most prolific offense in a 3-year span of all time. And that's the St. Louis Rams' greatest show on turf from 1999 to 2001. I'll be taking the year 2000 for the statistics. So it was 540 points, 33.8 points per game, 2.9 points per drive, a 69-point differential. This was by far the greatest show on turf's worst defensive unit, which means that they had better offensive numbers because they had to pick up the slack. They were first in passing, 17th in rushing, but look at who they had in the backfield. This doesn't tell the story. They had Marshall Faulk. Marshall Faulk was, in my opinion, the best at receiving from the running back position. He did it all. He was the ultimate weapon from the backfield. They had Kurt Warner, who was an MVP. They had Marshall Faulk, who was a 2-time MVP. They had Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, great depth at the wide receiver position. They had 7,075 yards in 2000. They had records of 13-3 in 1999, 10-6 in 2000, and 14-2 in 2001, where they came up short in the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots. They had the most points of all time. They have the most points of all time in a 3-year stretch that the NFL has ever seen. That's 1,569. They were first in total offense for 3 years in a row. And they were just an amazing, star-studded cast of characters. The greatest show on turf will be known as the most consistent offense, the best span of offense that we've ever seen from one team in NFL history. And I don't know if that will ever be topped. We'll see. But the number 1 team was just a little bit more dangerous. The only team to be better than the greatest show on turf, it has to be the 2007 New England Patriots. This is the team that went 16-0. This is the team that blew out every single team on their schedule, pretty much. Pretty close. And they would run up the score on you. They didn't care. Tom Brady was on a mission. Coach Belichick was on a mission. Randy Moss was on a mission. This was a team that set a whole bunch of records. They set records for touchdowns in a season by a quarterback with 50 from Tom Brady. Points in a season with 589. Highest point differential in a season with 315. Nobody else is even close to the 2007 New England Patriots. They scored 19.7 points per game more than their opponent. They had receiving touchdowns in a season with 23 by Randy Moss. That's yet to be broken. But the way Randy Moss came back, proved himself in 2007, and absolutely dominated competition was amazing. The most points on the road in NFL history. The most first downs in a season until the 2012 Patriots broke that record. The most wins in a regular season. This offense was ranked both first in yards and points in 2007, and they featured a roster with Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time, in my opinion, Randy Moss, in my opinion, the second greatest receiver of all time. They had Wes Welker, one of the best slot receivers of all time. They had Logan Mankins. They had Matt Light at tackle and guard. They had Dan Copen at center. They had a great offensive line. Dante Stallworth as a secondary wide receiver. They had Ben Watson at tight end. They were a loaded offense. They scored 3.53 points per drive. Okay? That is by far first. It's not even close. Take a look at this graph. It's not even close. The Patriots scored 3.53 points per drive. Every time they touched the ball, they were probably going to score 36.8 points per game, which is second all time. Total yards, 6,580. Turnovers, first. Passing, first. Rushing. Yeah, they could run too. They were 13th. But they also scored a lot of rushing touchdowns. And records, I already mentioned. The New England Patriots went to the Super Bowl. They could have been known as the greatest team of all time. But instead, I'll just give them the greatest offense of all time. The 2007 New England Patriots were the most dominant offense, along with great statistics, along with a team loaded with talent. The 2007 Patriots are the best offense of all time. And I hope you guys enjoyed the list because I took a ton of time. I took a ton of stats, as you can tell in this video. Let me know who you guys think is the greatest offense of all time, who you think the greatest 10, 5, 3 offenses are of all time, whatever you want to put down. And let me know if you agree with my list. It's Mitch of the Bottom Line View. Again, if you guys enjoyed this, subscribe for more NFL top 10s. Check out that top 10 defense of all time. And like the video. It's Mitch of the Bottom Line View.